My title is Exhibition for Social Change, or Social Change, let's say, through exhibitions. And I'm going to tell you briefly a little bit my story. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I was invited to talk about my work, and the MC introduced me kindly. This is Andreas, blah, 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 and he's a veteran in social entrepreneurship. And I had actually no clear feeling whether I should like it or I didn't like it or I shouldn't like it. However, I think I was committed, I was mentioned as a veteran, and this image came up in my mind when I think about veterans. And as we all know, veterans have battlefields. And the question was, of course, what is actually my battlefield? And those people who know me, who don't know me, think, okay, I'm working now for the last 30 years very much with blind people, with deaf people, with disabled people. So they may think my main, battlefield is disability. And those people who know me, they know it is not the full truth. My, let's say, drive, my personal story, my motivation to do what I'm doing now is actually injustice. And believe me or don't believe me, I have a big psychological problem. I have an issue when it comes to injustice. And of course, I'm thinking about a lot of time why I'm so much, have issues with injustice. And it goes really back, I think, to my early childhood. And it actually starts with a pain. Well, you know, when I was a boy, so maybe 7, 8 years old, I grew up in Germany. I'm German, and in a middle class, family, and there were a lot of boys around, and one of these, boys were a young boy with Down syndrome. And in these days, it was somehow a very difficult position for him, because he was not just, the guy with Down syndrome, he was literally the fool. And every time when the fool comes out, he was bullied, he was kicked, nobody wants to play with him, everybody makes fun out of him. And I was one of these, these boys who were standing around, and I had a pain because I asked myself why this, the weakest amongst us is actually all the time, let's say, the target for bullying. And on the other side, I was very much, embarrassed about myself, why I don't stand up and do something and say, hey, come on, let's a fool, let's play soccer or what. So this was actually when I was maybe 8 or 9 years old, and this was my first, impulse to think what I can do. The second one happened when I was 13 years old, and in these days I was, fascinated by German World War II. I knew all the battles, I knew all the generals, and I had a really amazing army out of plastic tanks, plastic warships, and it was, for me, all the time, high time when there was a documentary on TV, and when here, I think, the Stuttgart bombed Warsaw or whatever, gave me just a high feeling. And then in this, in this documentation, there came a sequence where the Jewish people were deported to the camps. And my mother was sitting behind me, and I said, the Jews are the guilty ones, why we, the Germans, lost the war. This is a very interesting, hypothesis. Of course, it's completely wrong. But my mother started crying, and I asked myself, what happened? Why are you crying? Do you have any pity with the Jews? And she said, no, but I have to tell you, our family is Jewish. So I have a family from my mother's side who is Jewish, and on the other side, what was, somehow an extreme, because I was very much aware about my father's side, and they were absolutely very strong Nazi supporters. So I'm somehow the blend, the mix of a perpetrator and of a victim. And of course, from 13 on, my sole interest was to understand how this could happen, what are the mechanisms of exclusion, why people are treated so badly, how it could happen that within wartime 6 million people were killed in an industrial way. Next short story is I was embarrassed. I studied philosophy, I studied history, I did a lot of stuff, I think, to of course, increase my knowledge. And when I finished my studies, I worked in a radio station, and one day I was asked by my director if I can interview a young man who had a car accident, lost his eyesight by an accident, and he applied to become a journalist, and I was asked to interview him and to see whether it can work or not. I have to tell you, in these days, 30 years ago, 35 years ago, I had no idea about blindness. I never met any blind person. I had all these awkward feelings. I did not know, can I say, nice to see you? He never will see me. Can I say, how are you? I consider he's certainly very, very, how to say, maybe despaired. So I had a lot of awkward feelings. I could not imagine that a blind person, especially in his case, having car accident and losing eyesight with 28 years old, can be somehow a valuable life. And it was, of course, a very, very, how to say, embarrassing for me, very painful for me, and believe me, it was my life-changing moment, because I understood that even with my history, my family history and my higher studies, I was tempted, I think, to believe that it's not a valuable life. And when you understand how actually people are excluded, it all the time starts, how to say, maybe to put them in distance, to marginalize, to discriminate, then later on, of course, to exclude, and then at the final end to exterminate. And this was something for me very, very complicated. You know, I had a chance then to work with this young blind man together for 2 years, and he proved me that I was completely wrong. Actually, being blind is just, how to say, another way, I think, to live reality, to have another, let's say, matrix, to perceive life completely different. But it's definitely not more poor than us, even though we, as sighted people, think being blind is the most horrible condition on this planet. And then I knew on one side there is a very bad assumption about blindness, disability. On the other side, I knew out of my personal experience there's a lot of potential, so I tried to understand how I can match these two worlds. And then, of course, it was quite easy. In a way, it was easy. You have to turn off the light, you have to darken the complete room, and you invite your blind friends to be the facilitators, the tour guides, and then you, as sighted people, are coming, you are blind. It's a role swap. And I made it in '88 for the first time in a garage, literally in a garage, and I asked my blind friends to serve beers and coffee and whatever, and then I invited my sighted friends, and believe me, it was for me, I think I was really longing for meaning for a long time, but when I was in this dark room for the first time, I knew that's it. Of course, it was a pretty bold idea to imagine that people want to enter to a completely dark room, that they want to be, how to say, served by blind people. Are blind people able to do it, actually? Many questions, but little by little it worked out. So in a nutshell, Dialogue in the Dark is a very super simple concept. It's a pitch dark room. We recreate environments like a city, like a nature, like a bar. And we invite the audience, I think, to come. And then I think you are going through this dark environment, and then good news, you're not alone, because you are all the time accompanied by blind people. And there is, of course, it's an immense psychological, let's say, journey, because in the beginning you are very scared, you are very afraid, you don't know what is next step, you don't know who is beside you, you are completely out of control, and then little by little, and it's really fantastic how our brain adapts, little by little you transform from fear in the beginning to fun at the end. And this happens regardless whether you are Japanese, Armenian, or Russian, or American, or Mexican, the behavior is all the time the same. And this is then, of course, called Dialogue in the Dark, which now is running for the last 31 years. You know, having an idea is, of course, great, but I think bringing an idea into reality, this is another chat, and it took me actually almost 10 years, I think, to find support, to shape it in a certain way, and that it could be, how to say, brought to the market. But there was not a single day in my now 30 years career, if I may say so, journey, better to say, as a social entrepreneur, that I regret even to do it and to sell darkness. And today, I can show off I'm the world market leader in dark business because we are in 50 countries. So this is our headquarters in Hamburg. It took me 10 years, I think, to find the money to make it. And then, of course, this idea then spread out. So as I just mentioned, we are in 50 countries now. These are just some sites in Istanbul, in Argentina, in Mexico, in Hong Kong, in Shanghai, and so on and so on. That means the idea actually, how to say, grew, and little by little, I think more and more people wanted to, let's say, have this feeling to be completely immersed. We generate, of course, 10,000s of jobs for blind people. So little by little, I think the idea grew, and now after 30 years, I think we have a certain global presence. You can imagine this is our global footprint, and my CO2 account is super bad, so I have to do on the other side really good, I think, to compensate my ecological damage I do with all the flights I have to take. On an annual basis, we reach out to around 800,000 people. This is obviously not too bad, and we have even much, much more because we have thousands of copycats. You may know it's all these dark restaurants and dinner in the dark is very popular, but there's somehow some copycats or second movers of us. So actually the idea grew and worked. Having now somehow the methodology in place, knowing there's a lot of competencies of people who are usually judged as disabled, but actually they are super, super abled, brought me to the second program, Dialogue in Silence. It's actually the same, more or less, but it's a complete silent room. You have a headset. And then, of course, you can imagine you are then invited to be guided by deaf people, and they teach you in non-verbal communication. Blind people learn you how to use your non-visual perception. Deaf people teach you how to improve your non-verbal communication. This is a very, very deep dive, and of course it added actually value, and we completely erased the notion of disability and to do something good for the needy people. Third example is Dialogue with Time. It's an exhibition where we employ people from 70 years up. When you are 69, 68, bad luck, you won't employ because we only hire people from 70. Our oldest employee is 95. It's now in different countries, and how it works, I think it's the same, let's say, mechanism to try, I think, to be focused on the assets rather than the deficits, and I think to build, let's say, an environment, a platform where people can enter to a dialogue. So the main pillar of all what I'm doing is actually to create a space where people can meet, where we swapping roles, and of course we irritate in a big way, because imagining not to see is something very hard. Imagining, I think, getting old is not a very comfortable thought, and of course being deaf is another thought which, not is very comfortable. Last example is Dialogue with the End. This is an exhibition where we work with people who are terminal sick in their final stage of life. We're working with people who are 80 and 90. Our oldest one is actually 97. And we have people with near-death experience. And it's not about death, it's about life. You know, I think Elizabeth talked about, let's say, this Greek wisdom, and one is definitely carpe diem, let's say, enjoy the day, and memento mori. Think and don't, deny that one day this we all have in common, that we are going to die. So it's about finality of life, and of course with people who are in their final stage of life, they have a certain, like a magnifier, and of course again it's to encourage people, I think, to dialogue about topics which might be seen as uncomfortable, but at the end it's very, very enriching. These are some of our, let's say, people we are now working with. Two passed away. She's 25 years old. And of course, it's great, I think, to have a chance for me personally. I'm doing all our stuff of egoistic reasons. I think to be in contact with people who are really, think differently about priorities in life. All is based actually on two main, insights. One of the biggest challenges is to make simple as simple, but without making it simpler. That means the only sort of knowledge is experience. This is Albert Einstein. And the second is Martin Buber. The only way to learn is by encounter. And that means with the components of, let's say, setting up a stage for encounter and setting up a stage, I think, for an experimental learning, you may, reach your targets. I told you we are in many, many countries. We are opening next week in Cairo. So we have just come from Saudi Arabia. So I think we are really, how to say, expanding. The idea is growing and growing, growing. And what is really, really, how to say, a phenomenon that the results and the output, the impact is all the time the same. This is a picture from Mexico, and this is two girls, maybe 7, 8 years old. This is a blind girl here with a cane, and this is a sighted girl with no cane. They are both smiling, and of course they are embraced by love. Of course, love is a big word, but maybe about empathy, openness, changing mindset towards people who are considered as disabled. You know, I think we all have a certain, how to say, will to give a contribution. That's why we are actually here. And the question is how to change the world. This is a big, big topic, and of course a big, big program. And of course we definitely won't succeed to change the world. But I think, as my example shows, even the most, how to say, crazy ideas can flourish. And it's actually not, I think, to change the world, but it's okay to change my world. And this is what I'm trying to do now for the last 31 years, and I'm definitely will do it for the next 31 years. Thank you so much.